Greetings and felicitations, everybody. It looks like apparently we are live, so we will be pressing on here. Tonight's show is going to be a little bit different than I had planned, honestly, because we have a couple people that have reached another step in their writing journey, so they needed some help, and I figured everybody can kind of use this advice, so what better time to do it than now? So this might be a little bit more into the technical stuff. Well, we're going to cover what happens when you get asked for the first 20 pages or 30 pages or 50 pages, depending on whatever the agent or editor wants. And then we're going to cover query letters. And before we get too far into that, I want to ask chat if everybody can hear me all right, and if my levels are good, etc., etc. From here, things look all right, but I don't know if the noise gate is clipping off too high, or if things are too loud or whatever. And as usual, I still have to come up with a solution for for monitoring the chat from here. So that's why I brought this screen up, because it's a lot easier to monitor. Lower the background music a bit. Sure thing. Lowered. How's that? Yeah, we'll just have to play around with it and everything like that. And there'll be a lot of talking tonight, and not as much goofing off, but that's okay. All right, thank you. And Viking Teabagger, thanks a lot. All right. And yeah, let me bounce back to the other screen. So yeah, so what we're gonna do, first things I need to announce is I have been just caught ridiculously busy with the day job and everything else. So instead of this being a weekly show, I'm gonna do it the first Thursday and the third Thursday of every month. And that's not going to include next week. Next week being the whole Christmas holiday thing. I'm not going to broadcast on that, but I'll be back starting in January. It'll be the first Thursday and third Thursday of every month, and we'll keep it light, and also whatever writing advice anybody needs. If I can answer it, I'll give you an opinion. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm right. So take everything I say with a grain of salt. I've been through this, but only once successfully, so just keep that in mind. All right, so let's see. So yeah, we might as well just get right into it. So the first topic is going to be, and we're going to be doing things just slightly out of order, actually. I should probably do the other topic first, just so it makes sense. So last week we covered kind of a pitch, how to pitch your story, and we had some fun with 99 chances. If we get a chance, we'll do some more 99 chances tonight, and try to come up with some stories and how we would pitch it and how we would establish some openings, because that's what really is going to be about tonight. So we're going to talk about how to do a query letter, how to send it in, essentially what the steps would be and what does it look like. And then we'll go into the first 20 pages. And that's really the goal of the query letter, is you're going to be querying agents, you're going to be querying editors to look at your story, and hopefully what you're going to get back is a request to say, hey, send me, the ultimate is send me a full, they'll say, send me the full manuscript. That's the ultimate. That's what you really want. And you're going to be pretty well off if you're like, hey, send me the first 20 pages. So the first 20 pages is probably going to be the bulk of this show, because there's a lot to cover on what those first couple of pages need to do. And you have a very limited time to do it. And I'm not saying that agents and editors are are impatient, but they are. And frankly, readers are impatient now. They've got Overwatch to play, Warhammer 40k figures to paint, all kinds of other entertainment options to mess with. So a book has to really grab people. It really has to have an amazing hook. And I wanted to grab The Martian, because that probably has one of the best opening lines I've ever read, you know. And it's basically, I'm effed, but he actually just swears, you know. That, I think those are the first 2 words of the book, and you're just like, whoa, why? What's going on? What's happening? Why? And it's one of the best hooks I've ever read. One of the best first paragraphs I've ever read, as far as like a modern book. And when I, as an overall disclaimer, when I talk about looking at other books and stuff to analyze what's going on, look at books that have sold in the last 2 years. I mean, we all have our classics, but if you open up a book nowadays and in your first chapter is concerning hobbits, and it goes into a long dissertation about what a hobbit is and what they like to do, you're not going to get through the door. Lord of the Rings, as it's written, would not get published today. That's just my opinion. I don't even think it would get through the door, you know. And certainly a lot of the elements that we know would not get in. Oh, okay, Jamal, thanks. Thank you for joining. All right, great, good deal. Yeah, because that's he's one of the guys we're doing it through. He got a request for his first 20 pages, so that's pretty awesome. Man, this chat over here is less than cooperative. Oh, man, no pressure at all. No pressure at all. And I will get you at least your first 50 pages as soon as I can. I got bogged down with 2 proposals, and I'll be working them over the weekend, but I am reading your stuff as well. So I will get your critiques back to you as soon as I can. And I might send them piecemeal so that you don't have to wait for the whole thing. And that way you can just move on. All right. So this thing is being a pain. So the first thing we're going to go over is query letter. They are easy and they are hard. So it's my agent, Sarah Megabo. And she works for a boutique agency. So the figures I'm about to cite they only get worse the bigger the agency you go with. So she gets between 25 and 35,000 queries a year. She usually signs between 2 to 4 clients. So do the math. That's pretty ugly, right? So there's some caveats to those numbers. If you don't know how to write a query letter, if you start completely, bonkers, she's just going to eliminate you. She can't go through that many emails. You know what I mean? She just literally cannot. So when she sees something that sets off alarm bells, like somebody doesn't know how to write a query letter, it literally signals to her that they probably don't know how to write a first chapter, and their novel is probably not there either. So she's not going to waste her time because she's got that many queries to do. And if she spent time reading every single email, she's not going to do anything else. So that's the same for every other agent out there. Editors tend not to do that because a lot of publishing houses have a thing where they say, we're not going to accept unsolicited manuscripts. And what that means is you have to have representation or they're not going to take you. Now, of course, everything I'm talking about right now with the query letters and all that is for traditional publishing. That does not apply if you're going to indie publish, if you're going to some small presses. These do not apply. So, because you don't have to query them. If you're indie publishing, you're doing all the work. So you're not going to really query yourself. But the same rigor that you apply to the first 20 pages or whatever that we're going to talk about, that still applies. So really quickly, I'm going to just show you something I have in my Scrivener template um, that has, let's see, let me switch over to Scrivener. Okay, so in my Scrivener thing, I have this template set up, and this is just a quick template to just show you what the elements of a query letter would be. So they're nothing really fancy. You've got the date up top, so you know when you sent it, and so you can keep track of these too, because you're going to get a ton of rejections, and you might as well keep track of them because you need to know who didn't answer you at all, who did answer you and gave you some feedback, who did answer you and just gave you a form letter. And the trick of it is if they gave you actual feedback, if they rejected you but said, hey, I really liked your story, and I feel that if you added an extra sidekick character, it would be stronger. Or if you started it in chapter 2 instead of chapter 1, it would be a stronger offering. Or maybe if this took place on the moon instead of Kansas, it would be a better story. But if you get any kind of feedback where an agent or an editor has taken time out of their day to personalize a rejection to you, that is actually a really, really good thing, because that means they care, and that means that their story resonated. That means that you've got something there. They're not just going to waste their time. A lot of times nowadays, you will not even get a response. You just throw it into the ether and you won't get anything back, or you'll get a form back, that just says something like, hey, we have a ton of manuscripts to look at, and regrettably we did not choose to go yours, and because of the volume of manuscripts we receive, we're unable to offer personalized advice. And yes, I've gotten a ton of these, which is why I can rattle off the text of them like from memory. So you're gonna get a lot of rejections, so you want to keep track of when you sent something out, when it got back, who looked at it, etc., etc. So then you're going to have the name of the agent, the agency, their address, etc., standard business letter kind of thing. And then, dear John Doe agent or Jane Doe or whoever, try to get the agent's name right. Try to it's getting off on the right foot. Obviously, if you get somebody's name spelled wrong, it's not an automatic rejection, but in this day and age, there's really no excuse for that, because all these agents and editors have websites. Go to their website, just look at how they spell their name. One of the things, and this is, I'm speaking for Sarah right now, but my agent spells her name S-A-R-A. There's no H. And she just gets a ton of Sarahs with an H in there, and she's not going to reject you because of that, but it just shows that you didn't do your due diligence, and that's something that it's an alarm bell. It's one strike against you. It's not necessarily a horrible thing, but it just shows, hey, lack of attention to detail, and anything that will detract from your presentation in a query letter is a strike against you. So the next thing you want to do is you're going to have an opening paragraph. There's just a short introduction and a reason for querying this agent. And usually it'll go along the lines of, oh, hey, my name is Mike Haspel. I met you at the Pikes Peak Writers Conference and we spoke about this. Or it'll be like, hey, I looked at your website and I saw that you represented, whatever, you represent Brandon Sanderson, and my stuff is like Brandon Sanderson, so I thought you might be a good fit. That's probably not a good opening, because you don't want to compare yourself to like a huge blockbuster. Like, you don't want to open it with like, oh, hey, I saw that you represented Brandon Sanderson's books, and my books are better than George R. R. Martin's and better than Brandon Sanderson's. That would be a very bad opening. That's something that people are going to be like, no, you're not better than George R. R. Martin. You might think you are, but you're not. The guy's been writing for forever. You know what I mean? So it's, you don't want to say things like, this is the next Harry Potter. This is the next Marvel movie. It is definitely an attention getter, but it speaks of hubris. And odds are it is not the next Marvel movie or anything like that. So now the next thing is what we did last week, the pitch and the log line. That's where it goes in. Some people advocate putting a log line as the first sentence, then giving a space, and then you have a pitch paragraph. So you have one paragraph to write and tell people about your story. And we can actually cover that a little bit if we have time at the end of the day. Today, we'll cover how to come up with that one pitch paragraph. I have a tool that I was able to grab called the story sentence. And there's actually two of them. And in fact, right now, since we have a little bit of time, I'm running a little ahead. We can just cover that. So there's two different story sentences that I'm going to jump to here. One is by Pixar. And I have like the rules of storytelling here. But the Pixar story spine sentence that I'm talking about really can help you generate that pitch paragraph. And all it is once upon a time there was blank. Every day blank until one day blank. Because of that blank. Because of that blank. Until finally blank. And ever since that day blank. And if you fill in those blanks, you've got a paragraph. and it's actually for those of you who joined us last week, if you realize, well, it has 7. I was going to say it had 8, but it only has 7 blanks. But it's awful. The story circle that we were using from Dan Harmon has 8 blanks. So it's like this has 7. And I'm sure if we tried, we could muscle an 8th blank in there and make it a little bit more complete. But if you can use that story sentence, that sets it up. And this is what Pixar does, like with every one of their stories. And Pixar stories are highly successful. No one can disagree with that. And then the other, this one it's a story mining technique. And this came from an article by Gary Provost, if I'm not, 100 Ways to Improve Your Writing by Gary Provost. That's where this came out of. And so the idea is this is perfect for writing a very short synopsis, like a paragraph. It has 11 stages, and you write one sentence for each stage. So once upon a time, something happened. That's the format, right? So you would just write whatever you want on the right side. And it's like, so I just saw Into the Spider-Verse. So I've got Spider-Man on my head. So it's like, once upon a time, something happened. So what happened? So, Peter Parker was bitten by a radioactive spider. So to someone, and he or she had decided to pursue a goal. Okay, so he decided that with great power must come great responsibility. So he or she devised a plan of action, even though, Peter decides that he's going to fight crime as Spider-Man, even though there are forces trying to stop him or her. Sure, there's, the Vulture, the Kingpin, all these other things. They were moved forward because there was a lot at stake. Yeah, well, Uncle Ben died. They claim that they're never gonna allow that to happen again, et cetera, et cetera. Now the Green Goblin has kidnapped Gwen Stacy, all this other stuff, So it's like, and just as things seem to be as bad as they could get, so the Green Goblin's got Gwen Stacy. They learned an important lesson, which would be the great power must come great responsibility, and offered a prize he or she had sought so strenuously to get. They decided whether or not to take it. And then in making this decision, they satisfied a need that had been created by something in his or her past. So like the last couple of sentences fit best with the Sam Raimi Spider-Man. He's offered a prize. Here comes Kirsten Dunst's Mary Jane, and she's, finally wanting to move beyond friendship. He decides whether or not to take it. He turns to her and says, we can be friends. She's like, just friends? He's like, yes. And in making this decision, he satisfied a need. Yeah, he did satisfy a need. He sacrificed to make up for his selfishness at the beginning of the movie, which is actually what got Uncle Ben killed, because he wasn't going to stop the robber. It wasn't his problem, and that had been created by something in his or her past. So there you go. It's like, he's not selfish anymore. Who am I? I'm Spider-Man. Done. Boom. There you go. That's one paragraph. So if you take this story mining technique, and I can make this whole Scrivener worksheet available to anybody who wants it. I'll put it up on my website or on Twitch or something, so that folks can have all these tools. And these but there you go. I mean, that's how you come up with the paragraph. And there's all kinds of other books on how to do synopsis worksheets and everything like that. So, but that's an easy one. So we're back to the pitch and the log line. Oh no. Blue screen of death for Jamal, Steve. That is not okay. Yeah, RAM, dude, I feel your pain. Like, bad RAM is awful. Save often. Hey, what's up? Elric 2010, checking in. What's happening? All right, so after you've got your pitch and your log line in there, and you may not always need your log line, but you definitely need a pitch. And also on the pitch paragraph, while I'm thinking about it, I know I'm like info dumping, but that's the beauty of the YouTubes and Twitch, is you guys can rewind this and listen to me again. Follow what their submission guidelines are, because normally the pitch should be a summary of the first maybe 30 to 50 pages, and then throw in a little hook at the end, throw in a little, just something, a little cliffhanger at the end to pique their interest. But some houses, some agents and editors, they actually want the ending. They want the entire thing in here, and they want to know how it ends. So just kind of follow what their guidelines are. And also keep this in mind, editors and agents are people. So if you don't know, rather than sending the query in the blind, just ask them. If they have a website or something, they usually have you can ask questions, or a blog or something like that. Just ask and say, hey, I'm going to send you a query. Do you want the ending in there, or do you not, or whatever? They'll give you an answer. And then the third paragraph might be a short biography, just describing you, or if you've entered the story into some writing contests and it's won, then you might want to, this came in first place at the Pikes Peak Writers Competition, etc. If it's just, hey, me and my friends think this is the greatest story ever written, don't put that in there. Also, I would be cautious of citing if you self-published, if you indie published it. And the reason I say that is it's not as prevalent as it was before, but there used to be a big stigma against indie publishing, because those were vanity presses for the most part. And for those that don't know, a vanity press is somebody who charges you money to publish your book. That should never happen. And I don't want to confuse people. There are services out there that will say, hey, look, if you pay us, we will help you publish your book. And by that, they mean we will copy edit, we will get a cover artist, we will do the layout and ebook layout for you, right? Well, they're providing a service. They're getting you a cover, they're doing the copy editing, they're doing editing, the developmental editing, they are doing the layout, the ebook layout. You're paying for those services. You're not paying for them to publish it. So be very wary of any service that claims that, oh, hey, if you send us your book, we'll take care of everything, we'll publish it. They don't make their money off of selling books. They make their money off of getting people to pay them to publish books. So just be wary of that. But the other reason I would say not to mention in your short bio, if you've self-published it, is because if you self-pubbed it and it didn't do well, well, you're basically advertising the book didn't do well. So no one's going to want to really pick it up. So that's the downside of trying to like self-publish and then trying to go to the traditional route afterwards. Now, some people have been able to do that. Trying to think of the guy's name. He wrote Dust, and he was able to go from indie publishing to traditional publishing. And but the difference is that they came to him. He didn't go seeking anybody out. They came to him and said, "Hey, we could publish your book for you in bookstores, wide, everything," right? But he's not paying them money. They're just like, "We can make money off of this." And he got a really sweet deal because he was like, "Well, why would I want? I'm already making money." I mean, his book was already a huge hit. So, Hugh Howey, that's his name. Hugh Howey and Dust. His book was already a huge hit, so he didn't really need them. They needed him. So it worked out. And then you just have like a polite write-up, looking forward to hearing from you, etc. So the way it would go is something just very quickly would be, "Dear John Doe, I've chosen you because you've written or you represent a bunch of Hugo award-winning science fiction writers. I have a story about a starship captain that blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera." And then the short bio is, "I used to be a starship captain in, for 20 years. I was a starship captain, et cetera, et cetera. So that gives me the expertise to write about starship captains. And I feel that we would work well together. Look forward to hearing from you. Sincerely, Jane Q. Author." And that's how that would work. And if you want to see a bunch of really good examples of query letters and how they work, and they're successful ones, Writer's Digest has a whole section called Successful Queries, where they ask agents to go, "Hey, can you send us a query letter that got you to pick up this book? To represent or sell." And usually these are done as tie-ins as part of the publicity for when a book is about to drop. So just watch that column, and they probably have a repository of at least 50 on it. And you can look on there and see the formula that people are using. And usually gimmick queries, like writing on a different weird kind of paper so it jumps out of the slush pile, all that stuff, those don't work for the most part. So they just don't. So I wouldn't waste your time doing stuff like that. I would just kind of stick to that. There's a website called Query Shark that is also extremely useful. So check those assets out. There's also a ton of other stuff about queries on there. Get feedback on your query too. Don't just send it out in the blind, but I mean, you can put it on some forums on Reddit and stuff like that. Just take it with a grain of salt that those people may not know what they're talking about. It's just like anything else on the internet. You don't know who they are. They might tell your query's fantastic or your query's terrible. It's just so, take everything with a grain of salt. So that's kind of my short download on queries. And now we're going to jump into like the first 20 pages or so. What your first chapter has to really do. And I'm going to run through a bunch of different things right now. So bear with me because it might be kind of a data dump. And I will cite these sources where I'm getting this information from, because this is not all from my own noggin. But I felt that these were really, really good things to keep in mind. And then we'll wrap up talking about the first actual page of your 20 pages, because there's actually some serious detail that needs to go into it. So for the first thing we're going to do is talk about your actual story opening. So in your first chapter, it's got to do, let's see if I can get this up and running. Let's see. Hey, all right. So your open, not just your opening chapter, but every scene should cover. Ooh, that does not work. Getting right where no one can see. All right. Okay, that's the first question. Who wants what? You know, that sets up your motivation. And this is stuff from, there's a book out there called Goal, Motivation, Conflict that you should check out, definitely. But who wants what? So at the beginning of every scene, you got to do the who wants what, you know, and that's kind of a the driving force. I mean, even if you do improv, who wants what? That's the opening thing. This works for any kind of storytelling. If you are a GM and you're doing interactive storytelling like D&D or something like that, who wants what? You know what I mean? Well, you know, Thorin wants the dragon's treasure. You know what I mean? So the second question, so that's the first question. The second question is, why can't they get it? Right? And that sets up the conflict. Why can't they, you know, what does Thorin want? He wants gold. Why can't he get it? Because there's a dragon there. There's a dragon guarding the gold. So he can't get it. And then the third question, it's pivotal, is what is he going to do? What is he going to do about it? You know, to get rid of that obstacle, to get rid of number 2. Why can't they get it? And that is story structure in a nutshell. That's how you build every single scene and everything. So you need to have that in your first chapter. And what's going to be crazy is I'm going to make an argument that you need to have that on your first page. And it may not be exactly what the whole book is about. So we were talking about The Hobbit, right? So who wants what? Is Thorin wants gold. They can't get it because, you know, there's a dragon guarding the gold. What are they going to do about it? Well, he's got to get, you know, 13 other guys with him and a wizard, and they're going to go and they're going to kill the dragon and get the gold. That's what the book is about. Well, what is like the first opening scene of The Hobbit about, right? Who wants what? Well, it's Bilbo, and he wants a peaceful morning. Why can't he get it? Well, because there's a wizard asking him to go on an adventure. And what is he going to do about it? He's going to get rid of the wizard. He's going to tell him off. In fact, he's like, good morning. You know, we don't want any adventures around here. Good morning. Kind of makes it really hinting that I don't want you around. I don't want to go on an adventure. Leave me alone. I'm okay with my, you know, tea and my pipe of weed and my cheese and go away. So every scene has to have something like that. So who wants what can mean that, you know, your character just wants a cup of coffee to get going. Why can't they get it? Because there's a huge line at Starbucks. You know, have we even started telling the story? Yeah, we have. But you've engaged the reader, because they're just like, well, are they going to get the cup of coffee? What are they going to do about it? Well, most of the time we're just going to wait in line until it's our turn. But that's a scene. That's a scene. So you need to have that in your first 20 pages. You need to have that. Hey, Lem, what's going on, man? So you need to have that in your first 20 pages. You need to have that. You need to have that at least, even if it's just a small part of a scene. And we'll go over some examples. But your first chapter has to have all that. So it's got to have who, it's got to have the what, it's got to have the when, and it's got to have the why or the why not. All that's got to be in your first 20 pages. You know what I mean? And preferably, again, the more you can cram of this in your first page, the better. Especially if you're answering a query. So, I can't see. I'm gonna have to switch screens really, really quickly. So he's let's see. Mankara just wanted some sunlight. Exactly. So for folks that are not familiar, he's talking about my novel Graveyard Shift at the beginning, in chapter 2, actually, which chapter 2 was chapter 1. I added a new chapter in the print version, in the version that you guys have. So chapter 2 is where the story really started. And it starts with my main character on a rooftop, and all he wants is some sunlight at the end of the day because he gets power through the sun. So he's charging up. Oh yeah, and I'm sorry, still one more name. You are allowed to chat. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Normally, if I'm doing the podcast live, then I won't interact with the chat. But for this, I'm doing all the we're doing the normal thing, interacting with the chat, everything like that. If you guys have questions, please ask, and I'll try to answer them if I can. No, we're not spoiling it. We're not spoiling it. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. So don't worry about that. Yeah, so in any case, let me go back to this. So there are some openings. So all this stuff has to be in your book, in your first chapter. And if you can, throw it into chapter 1. Now there's on page 1, but there's some limitations that come with that. And we'll cover that momentarily. But first we want to cover some openings that editors and agents see a lot. You know what I mean? That you want to avoid. So some story openings to avoid. And I'm pulling this from a series that was on Pub Rants. That is Agent Kristen Nelson's blog, which is a great blog to follow, by the way. So don't open your novel with the main character alone somewhere thinking. That happens quite a bit, and people. So I'll write these down. So no sitting and thinking opening. You know what I mean? And it's not that these openings are bad. It's that some of them are bad, but it's just that they see them a lot. But I had no idea when I first wrote my opening for Mankara. I thought I was being very, very avant-garde, very bold, and it turns out I wrote an opening that people see like 30 times a day. So, but of course, being, you're a novelist or a writer or something, and you're in a vacuum, you won't really know that. So I'm not going to go into huge numbers of detail into these openings. If you want to see them, go onto Pub Rants. Each one is its own article and goes into very, very deep thinking. Into deep analysis. I'm just going to cover these just quickly. So she has something called white room syndrome, and that is essentially, do you remember in the Matrix when they have the construct, right? And there's nothing there. It's like Neo and Morpheus are just standing in a white room. That's white room syndrome. So it's like, does your novel start with a lengthy portion of dialogue where you don't really know who's talking, You're not invested in the characters, and you don't know where they are. They're just talking. So the person's imagination is not, the reader's imagination is not able to fill in where they are. Are they on the bridge of a starship? Are they in a bistro in Paris? You have no idea. And it's like that's white room syndrome. Let's see. Does the novel open with what we call a mindless task or everyday norm? Right, and that's your, Monday started like every normal day. And I can actually think of some books that use this to great effect. Like The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's essentially a very normal day until there's a bulldozer gonna knock his house down. So it's not a normal day at all. Douglas Adams is kind of using that as an opposite thing, to go, oh, it was normal except for this, and he's going for humor. But just be careful of that. It's like I said, these are not unsuccessful. They're just opening with a mindless task. Or normal. Okay. And then let's see. Tied into this normal thing is, and I know we talked about this last week. Remember, we went through the hero's journey. And hopefully I have this queued up. And it'll be awesome. It'll look like I prepared and have things. So here we go with the hero's journey, right? So we start with up here at the kind of 1 o'clock position. And it says the ordinary world, the call to adventure. That's where the hook comes in, right? So the hero's journey, a lot of writers start with that. It's not a bad start. It's really great, right? But we've been hammered into it that your story has to start with the ordinary world. So what the effect of that is that when an agent or editor says, hey, send me your first 20 pages, how much of that is your ordinary world? For a lot of us, it might be the first 20 pages. So what you've sent to your agent is the place where nothing's happening. It might be really great. It might be awesome. Oh, hey, there's the Shire and hobbits like living there and gardening and smoking pipeweed and doing all this stuff, and it's awesome. And then on page 21, the wizard arrives. But that's too bad because you only got to send in the first 20 pages. And I actually have a sob story about that. There's a story I sent in to my editor, which got rejected. And I know exactly why it got rejected. I tried to set up a really large story, and she said, send me the first 50 pages. And I cut as much as I could to get people into the other world. And I was well into the crossing the first threshold. They were in the other world. But it was still set up. And on page 51 or 52, my next chapter started, which was a huge space battle. And she never got to read it. And and her note to me was, maybe if you did a deep dive or into the genre, implying like, hey, do a deep dive into the genre to have a big space battle, this would work better. So what that tells me is that my opening is entirely too long. I need to get to that space battle way faster. But that's just a perfect real world example of how starting with the ordinary and spending too much time in the ordinary world can reach up and bite you. Where did I get that diagram? I Google searched it. So I see. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's who made the diagram. Yeah, I googled it. It's really, really good. It's an excellent diagram. There are a couple of other ones out there, but that one was really comprehensive. So Yeah, by all means, give her the credit if that's who made it up. And I'll try to bring it back up here. Yeah. So yeah, that's who made it up. So it's pretty awesome diagram. Really good. Because it actually incorporates all the it incorporates the Women Who Run with the Wolves too, which is a really good book. And I haven't read the 78 Degrees of Wisdom, but I have read Chris Vogler's and of course Joseph Campbell. But this is a great diagram. Works amazingly well. All right, so yeah. So and then number 4 is your novel opens with a lengthy passage of talking heads dialogue. So that's something to watch out for. And I know we say not to look for, not to use, just use said, and don't use, shouted, or unless somebody is actually shouting or something like that. But you do have to have a lot of, you should have a lot of descriptors. Break up your dialogue with action so that it flows a little bit better. I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit here because I have some more stuff to do and we're running a little short on time. So number 5 is your novel opens with running or action. And that is kind of a double-edged sword because writers are supposed to begin their stories in the middle of a scene, or as close to the story beginning as possible. And so you see a lot of trends where somebody starts a story in the middle of a battle, right? A really good example of this is Episode 2, the Star Wars, Attack of the Clones. It starts with that huge, massive space battle. I think it's Attack of the Clones. It might be the third one. I don't remember. But one of them starts with a massive space battle with a bunch of people and fighters, and all this stuff is going down. And you don't know that Anakin and Obi-Wan are actually piloting this thing. So for the first couple of seconds, you're just kind of like, wow, there's a big space battle going on, but you're not invested. And that's a problem. So if you start your novel with a big battle, but nobody knows who the characters are, they're not going to be emotionally invested. It's just going to be pew, 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 and nobody cares. So, and as much as I knock JJ, he opened the 2009 Star Trek perfectly. He established the characters first very, very quickly, and casting had a great deal to do with that, because when you see Chris Hemsworth, granted, we didn't know who he was at the time. He wasn't Thor yet, but he kind of has that William Shatner look, and he's sitting in the captain's chair. So you're just like, hey, I kind of know who this guy is already. Another one that worked really to great effect was Rogue One. With the opening that they had, the casting was, again, phenomenal. The young Jyn Erso, the way that she behaved and everything, and the way the camera focused on her and everything like that, they made you care about the character. If you don't care about the characters, it's just a big spectacle battle. No one's going to be invested. So that's the downside of that. If your novel opens with prose problems, so like overly flowery prose, go back to this. Now, again, that might be your goal if you're trying to write a period historical novel and you're trying to establish that this is a very kind of Jane Eyre type story that you're going to tell. But overall, normally that doesn't really work. This next one is a killer, and everybody's done this. So your novel begins with backstory. that is a killer, you know, or a data dump. I'm going to add data dump to that. um, and you want to avoid both those things in your first chapter, because those are alarm bells to an agent or an editor. If they see that you have hordes of backstory in there, or data dumps. And the best example of a data dump I can think of is in the Sum of All Fears. There is a chapter where Tom Clancy describes how a nuclear weapon works. And it goes into such detail. It's insane. But do you need to know how that works for the story? No, you don't at all. And along with number 7, I will throw in a prologue. A lot of people, myself included, like prologues. And for certain genres, they work. For fantasy, you can get away with putting a prologue in, because you got to tell people that, oh yeah, well, you know, 1,000 years ago, Sauron made the One Ring. You know what I mean? Something like that. And even though that you can, it's better nowadays though not to do the prologue. It's better to take that information and seed it in, you know, especially if you've got a character that's a mentor character that goes, oh, but you know, Frodo, you don't know about this ring that you have, do you? Well, sit down and let me tell you. 1,000 years ago, Sauron made, you know, a ring to rule them all. And that accomplishes the exact same thing as a prologue, but it's now in the text. But you still do not want that in your first chapter. You don't want a lot of backstory. You don't want a data dump. If your story does have a prologue, you don't want to send that. When an agent says, hey, send me your first 20 pages, do not send the prologue. Send chapter 1. And the same thing with going back to The Ordinary World. If your novel opens with The Ordinary World, you might want to send chapter 2 when the call to adventure happens, or cut as much out as you can until the call to adventure happens. And let's see, almost to the end of this. Yeah, so this is a critical thing. This is one I messed up. Your novel begins with bodily functions. Right? So I thought I was being all avant-garde and clever because I had my novel begin with my main character getting up and taking a leap. And I was just like, oh, this is really cool. But this is an unbelievable cliche, and it sets off a million alarm bells. So avoid vomiting, peeing, bleeding, or whatever, spitting, crying, whatever else. You know, bodily function, don't do it. It does matter in the genres, because if you open a thriller where your character is like applying a tourniquet to himself or herself because they're bleeding to death, that's a pretty good opener. You know, you're like, whoa, you know, what just happened, right? So in an action story, in a thriller, that could work, that kind of opening. But and then don't open with the weather at all. I mean, there's it was a dark and stormy night. That's all I need to say about that. We've all heard that cliche, so we don't need to go further into that. And then the last one is the novel opens with pithy wit or wisdom that will become the story's theme, right? That used to be very much in vogue. It isn't anymore. So just avoid that, you know. And it's like, you know, the standard opens will be like, if only I knew then what I knew now. Or, you know, my grandmother always told me, be careful what you wished for. Boy, was she right. You know, something like that. You've set up like the theme really obviously. There's a couple more things I want to cover really quickly. Because I do need, unfortunately, I kind of need this up. We're trying to keep these to right around an hour, give or take. So the first line of your first 20 pages, your first line of that first page has to be really good. It has to be a hook. It doesn't. The better the hook, the easier it is to get in, and we could do a whole session on just first lines of hooks. Stephen King talks about how he spends months trying to come up with the first line of a book because it's that important. So, and your whole first chapter, the whole purpose of the first chapter is to get people to want to read the second chapter. So, especially if they don't have it, if an agent says, hey, send me the first 20 pages, and you send them, and at the end of 20 pages, they're like, oh man, I gotta know what happens. Well, that's great, because the next email you're gonna get is send me a full. And that's what you're after, right? And then from there, they're gonna want representation, they're all kinds of stuff starts to happening. So the opening line is extremely important. And try to open your story as late as you possibly can. So like so if you started during like a Mexican standoff, everyone's got, it's a whole Reservoir Dogs situation. Everyone's got the guns pointed at them and they pull the trigger at the same time, right? Rewind like 30 seconds. That's where you start your story. When everybody is about to draw their guns. What's making them draw their guns? What's you want to establish just enough of things are normal until somebody does this, and now everyone's drawing their guns. Now they're all pointing their guns at one another. That's kind of the way you want to set things up. And then let's see. Conflict, of course. Who wants what? Why can't they get it? You got it. You got to hammer that now. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. He brings up the gunslinger. That is a fantastic opening line. It is really, really good. You gotta have stakes in that first 20 pages. And you have to make people care. And then now we're gonna go into the first page, right? So the caveat with the first page is that if you're using standard manuscript format, you don't get a first page. You get, if this is a page, you get 2/3. You have your title here, a space or whatever, and the first paragraph is down here. So this, and it works out to be about 16 lines, 14 to 16 lines, and that's what you get. And in those 16 lines, you got to have an opening hook. Oops. Which is hopefully your first line, but it doesn't have to be. You need down here in your last line, a small cliffhanger. And it's not necessarily a cliffhanger. Michael Stackpole calls these buttons. And they're the kind of thing that, if you can imagine how if you were reading a book about The Empire Strikes Back, and you got to the end of a chapter, right? And Luke's hanging on to the weather vane, and he's like, he told me enough. He told me you killed him. And then Vader answered, no, I am your father. End of chapter. Right? That's a hell of a button, because nobody on the planet is going to put the book down right then. They're going to turn the page. And here's the key, is on the next page, it's not about Luke and Darth. It's about Leia and Lando and trying to get Boba Fett, trying to get to Boba Fett before Han can, before he can take Han off of Bespin. And so you've got to read that whole chapter. And that whole chapter ends with a button too. You know what I mean? And then you go back to Luke and Darth. And that's how you get people to read the entire book in one night and not put it down, is you just keep leading them along. So you want a small button. And the reason I say a small one is because you're not going to be able to drop a, no, I am your father right here. This is page 1, right? So you're not going to be able to do that. But you want a small button. And oh, by the way, the reader's not going to see the page laid out like this. Your first page in standard manuscript format is not going to equal your first page when it's published as a novel. So you don't need to worry about that. This is literally for the agent and editor's benefit, because that's who's going to read it in standard manuscript format. So you want a small button here just to build enough suspense to get the agent or editor to turn the page. That's all you want. So you got to pay attention to formatting. And that's why I said it's 14 to 16 pages. You got to or 16 lines. So you got to watch that. The other thing that you need in here, so you got opening hook, you have genre. You have to have something of the promise of the genre, right? And it doesn't need to be, sometimes it's really easy. You know what I mean? If your first paragraph is, James T. Kirk strode on the bridge of the USS Enterprise starship, I've just told you what genre it was without really doing anything. I just said, hey, this is science fiction or space opera. That's what you're going to get. That's easy, but the opening hook, a genre, the voice, you know what I mean? So that when you're reading it and it's like, it says something like Douglas Adams, the Vogon construction ships hung in the air in exactly the same way that bricks don't. That is a really good example of the voice of that book. You're going to get some very dry humor. You're going to get some sentences that you may have to read twice in a row to get the joke, because they won't make sense on first reading. And that's a pretty good start. You shouldn't, of course, you have to introduce the character, right? And there's kind of a rule of thumb, which I'm not a fan of, but it doesn't matter if I'm a fan of it or not. Your reader will assume that the first character that's introduced is your main character. And that's not always true, but that is what your reader is going to assume. And I've run into that in numerous stories because I kind of like starting with a secondary character or tertiary character, or even somebody you might never see again. And guess what? Those stories haven't sold. So, lesson learned, right? So, what I'm going to do right now, kind of put myself out. I'm going to show you guys my first pages from a couple of stories, and these have been rejected, so I got to work on them anyway. So take it with a grain of salt. What you're gonna see here. And this first one, low battery. Why am I getting a low battery one? Like it's literally plugged in. Well, it wouldn't be part of Long War if there weren't technical difficulties. So hopefully this will last a little bit. So the first story I'm going to show you, and hopefully you guys can see this. This is for a story that is kind of, if you squint at it long enough, looks very much like a lit RPG. And this is chapter 1. And this is the first 14 to 16 lines. And I'll read along with it. So, 1. The Zoetrope. Elves weren't supposed to get cold. At least that's the way the tales told it. That fact brought little solace to Kaisa as she and the other woman made their way into the village, pelted by sideways blowing water, which couldn't decide whether it wanted to be rain or snow. Are you cold? Kaisa asked Sam. The elven warrior trudged through the bleak darkness beside her, head down, cloak's hood up against the weather. No, Sam's reply was uncharacteristic. The other woman was normally talkative and more than willing to make conversation simply for the sake of it. She'd fallen to silence hours ago. Sam wasn't the woman's actual name, of course. It was far longer, each syllable denoting a century of service that was before the added honorifics for the performance of great deed. Samalin Todurlai was her true name, but who had time for that? Well, I'm freezing, Kaisa said, her own name permanently locked into 2 syllables. Her toes protested with numb burning. Her sodden boots only made it worse. You're half-elven, Sam nearly grunted, then again fell silent. So, what have we done here? You know what I mean? We have an opening line. My opening line could probably be better, but it does two things. It tells you the genre right away, or part of the genre. It tells you there's elves, right? Oops. Microsoft being too helpful. It tells you that there's elves, which means there's fantasy, right? First sentence, there's fantasy. They're not supposed to get cold, so they are cold. So I'm setting up kind of who wants what right away, right? So who wants what? Kaisa wants to be not cold. Why can't she have it? Because they're walking through sleet. And she wants conversation too, but her partner is not being conversation. What is she going to do about it? We don't know yet. So we don't really get a little hook at the bottom of the chapter. We don't really get we get character. We know that there's Kaisa and Sam. And Kaisa is probably the main character because we're telling things from her point of view. And that's what this tells us. So this could still use a lot of work. But it's not a bad opening, but it could use a lot of work. So now the next one is from a story that was also rejected, but this has more going on, right? And it looks like I'm going to need to scroll up that we can get the whole. So this opening, chapter 1, the fall of Nebuchadnezzar, right? That doesn't tell you anything at all. You're like, well, I don't know what that name means. I don't know what's going on. So I'll read along here. So you get Tom Mary, beloved of the gods, Kemet, the Black Land, in the city of Nebuchadnezzar, it being the year after the 8th cattle count, it being the start of the 16th year of Pharaoh's reign. This is how chaos came to beloved Kemet, realm of Ma'at. It was the last day of the month of Shemu, the eve of first Akhet. Far to the south, in the city of Abeju, Pharaoh would be officiating over the last days of the sacred festival to encourage the river's inundation and a bountiful year. Pharaoh did not do many things well. As a king, he was a grand disappointment, but he could revel. He excelled at that with no argument, and this night he would no doubt seek new levels of carousing and debauchery, blissfully unaware of the peril that threatened the two lands. Lord Meriptah stood at the high temple's outer enclosure and glared at the blue-white conflagration engulfing the city. He ran his hands over the rough, whitewashed mud brick of the wall's lip and struggled to contain his emotions. Actinic flames danced through the houses and huts below, setting everything ablaze. The heat swelled as an ill wind drove the unnatural firestorm farther into the city and closer to the temple wall. So we have a lot more going on than in the other opening, right? So we have voice, which is really, really important, right? So the voice here is going to be a lot more formal, a lot more authoritative than, say, the voice in the first passage that I wrote. And the first passage is essentially like a standard fantasy story. This is a lot more authoritative. We don't get, one of the things we don't get is genre. We do get a hint of genre, right? So I'm talking about Pharaoh's reign. I'm talking about the Black Land, which Kemet, which is the ancient name. Okay, thank you. So I'm talking about Kemet, which is the ancient name for Egypt. So we now know this is in the past. The way people are dating things is about by the Pharaoh's year. We get that this could be historical fiction. That's part of the genre. It's not historical fiction. It's actually fantasy. But it's giving you hints that this is not modern world. This is not the normal. It's not going to be a police procedural, say. You know what I mean? This is going to be different. So we establish that. We establish voice, that it's going to be authoritative. We do establish character. Lord Meripta is there, but we don't know anything about him. We have nothing about him, so we don't have a whole lot of character to work with in this passage. And we do get a small cliffhanger because he's standing on the temple's outer enclosure, and there is a fire engulfing the city, and it's coming right up to the temple wall. So you do get a little bit of a cliffhanger on, well, what is he going to do? There's a fire coming at the temple wall. He's got to get out of there. You know what I mean? But you get a hint that it might not be historical fiction because the fire is blue. Right? So fire is not normally blue. So it's magic fire. But I don't come right out and tell you that. So it does require a little bit much of a leap on the part of the reader, which, keep in mind, these were rejected. So were they rejected because of the problems I'm pointing out? I don't know. But it's just some data points to figure out that, hey, these are the things that needed to be done. And also keep in mind, and I need to caution folks about this, you can sit there and second guess yourself forever. That's part of being a writer. You're going to think, no matter what, this stuff sucks. Guaranteed. You can second guess yourself crazily. But having all that, we'll leave it at that for this session. We'll come back. And we didn't get to 99 Chances tonight, but that's okay. We covered a ton. And my next show, gotta bring up a calendar, is going to probably it'll be the 3rd of January. So we are skipping next week. We're not going to have a show next week. We're going to go the 3rd of January, and then from January on, we're just going to do the 1st and 3rd Thursday of the month. If you guys have any questions, leave comments under the YouTube vid. You can hit me up on Facebook, anything like that. If you need, if you want me to clarify some stuff or anything, we can go far more in depth. I mean, there's just a wealth of information to know, and this is doing me good too because it's forcing me to review all this stuff, and so I enjoy it. So thank you very much for tuning in, and I think that's going to do it for this show. And I'm gonna bail on this right now, and so thanks for sticking around, and I will talk to you guys later. Out.